You mind? You mind if I record? I'll also be taking notes, but this allows me to be accurate.
I imagine we're both being recorded right now.
Really?
And watched.
I think that's for my safety.
Or mine.
You think I'm a threat?
Are you? Kind of weird when you think about it. They don't want me to kill myself so they can kill me. You worried about your safety?
No.
But you're nervous.
Sure.
I like that you're honest. That stood out in your letters. That's why I picked you.
I think if we're not honest, what's the point?
I haven't met a lot of college professors before. Lawyers, yeah, shrinks, but you don't look like what I thought.
How's that? You mean black?
I'm not allowed computer access, so I couldn't look you up. I mean, I don't know what they think I'm going to do with a computer, you know? I'm going to incite, reach out to my huge fan base.
Is my race a problem for you?
I never know what word to use. Black, African American?
I like black. Is it a problem, Rick?
I was just surprised. Doesn't matter to me. I'm not racist. I've lived and worked with all kinds of people.
Hispanic?
In Texas? Are you kidding? I mean, you could throw a rock in any direction and you hit one. Unfortunate expression there.
Muslim?
Sure.
You have Muslim friends?
I knew some, but those people, they kind of stick together, you know?
And you had no personal animus against Muslims and Hispanics.
Oh, man.
And yet, here you are.
Look, I'm not crazy. It was the situation. I mean, there was enormous pressure from the brass and stuff.
Rick, if you insist on repeating the same bullshit your lawyer gave the court, then I'm going to walk out of here and never come back. On the other hand, if you want to talk to me, one person to another, really talk to me about what happened and why, maybe help us all understand so that nobody else finds themselves in your situation, then we can do that. But you have to be honest with me. Can you do that? Can you just be honest?
Okay.
I want to hear your side, Rick, in your own words. That's why I'm here. If you're honest with me, I'll see to it that what you say is printed just like you say it. No filter, no editing, your words. They haven't given us a lot of time, Rick, and I honestly don't know if they'll let me come back here after today.
I don't have anybody to talk to in here.
You're in solitary, yes?
For my own protection.
You sound skeptical.
Yeah, well, my experience has been in certain situations, people tend to act in their own interests.
There's value in your death?
The government certainly seems to think so.
But there's been no decision yet.
Oh, if you believe that, then you're not nearly as smart as you think you are. I'm not talking about the courts, justice. I saw things. I know stuff that would make a lot of people look bad.
Well, that's why it's important to talk to me now. That the real story gets told now before people out there change it into something else. Distort it, revise it.
And why are you here, Professor? Out of your ivory tower? You what? Performing a social service? No thought for yourself?
Well, to be completely honest, on my 9-hour drive down here today, in my antique Fairlane, which should have had a complete engine rebuild a year ago, I did allow myself a tiny fantasy about that big-ass book advance. But that's not what motivates me. Obviously, there's interest in you, in your story. I think it's important. Maybe I'll write a book like we talked about, or maybe at the end of the day, I'll just go home and burn my notes.
In that case, what's the point of me talking to you? I mean, why are you here?
Fourth of July. The first time I understood race in this country, I was at a 4th of July parade with my folks. My mother had put red, white, and blue ribbons in my hair, and I was very proud of them. I was standing there on the corner holding her hand. My daddy had gone to get me a snow cone. And this white policeman who was providing security looked over at me and smiled. I knew he was going to say something nice because that's what grown-ups did. And he leaned over and said to me very quietly, "Hello, little nigger. How are you doing today?" I was 6. I think it's fair to say that most black people don't spend a lot of time trying to understand racism so much as survive it. We're looking for the work around, not the explanation. I'm a little bit different maybe. I've thought a lot about that police officer over the years and the ways he changed me. Was he just a man of his time? Like the nose on his face, is racism so much a part of him that he wasn't even aware of it anymore? Or did he know exactly what he was doing? And there was a special thrill in taking this black child's racial innocence. I started out in psychology, then moved to sociology. But where I wound up was history. When a moment of change arrives and history finally lurches into a new direction, what sets it in motion? Great man on a white horse? Hegelian cycles? UFOs? I just want to believe anyway that mostly it's just ordinary people in a moment of decision. Every landslide begins with a single rock suddenly in motion. We're at one of those moments right now. You're at the heart of it. I think it's important. I think it's critical to understand you, Rick. Understand why you did what they say you did.
I didn't talk at trial. The only reason I didn't talk at that trial was because my lawyer said I should.
Self-incrimination?
Well, not that it made any kind of difference to the jury, but the worst part was me sitting there all those weeks listening to the bullshit being said and not being able to respond.
So you want to clear the record. I get it. We can do that.
Yeah, okay. So, it wasn't about race.
Okay. What was it about? Why don't you start by telling me about yourself? Growing up, Austin, right?
Born yet, but we moved a lot.
Why was that?
Military brat. Dad was Air Force.
Were you close?
My dad? I don't think he was too big on family. He told me I was a mistake on more than one occasion. And mostly I tried to stay out of his way.
He was abusive?
Well, that would be awfully convenient, wouldn't it? It would just wrap this whole thing up in a nice, tidy bow.
He never hit you?
Sure, of course he did. He rung my bell good a couple of times. There's nothing wrong with that. Spare the rod.
Religious household?
My mom was a big believer. My dad, not so much. He's more of the Church of Budweiser.
He drank?
This is Texas.
He had a problem?
Not when he was drinking. He liked a cold one at the end of the day, take the edge off. Or two, or three. It's not so different from most people I know. You drink, right?
I did, sure.
You don't anymore?
Were you religious?
I went to church service with my mom, Sunday school, church suppers. They dumped me in the river when I was 13. Whole 9 yards. It meant a lot to my mom, comfort her. I kept waiting for the moment to happen where, the spirit would descend or whatever, but it never really took. It was just something you did, so I did it.
Would you say that's true of you in general? Go with the flow?
Don't get all excited, Professor. Things are a bit more complicated than that.
Fair enough. Okay.
Okay.
So is it true you've become religious in here?
Is that what they say out there? I talk to the minister sometimes.
That help you?
Not so much.
So you wouldn't exactly describe your father as abusive, but you left home when you were 16 and moved in with your grandparents.
It seemed like the best thing to do at the time. We were beefing a lot, my dad and me. It's teenage stuff, I quit school and he didn't like that, so I left. I don't blame him for that. He was trying to be helpful in his own way.
Why did you quit?
I hated it. I don't know. I was stupid back then.
What did you do after you left?
Worked. Whatever I could pick up. Paper out, bag boy, non-union construction, pizza delivery, whatever.
What did you want to be at this point? Did you have any career aspirations?
Career aspirations. I think that's a bit more than I was capable of back then. I had some ideas, I guess, of maybe being like an architect.
Why?
I liked building things. The idea of building things that last.
You never studied?
Got some brochures from a junior college, but
And then you joined the Army.
had to get my GED first, but that was no real problem.
Tested out on your first try. Impressive.
Turns out I'm not stupid. In fact, my IQ is something. It's pretty high, I'm told.
Why did you join up?
We were at war.
9/11.
Yes, ma'am.
Patriotic.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing. My brother joined up.
No Army?
Marines.
Marines? Wow. Well, he's still in?
He died over there.
Sorry.
Me too. He was my favorite brother. I didn't want him to go, but he thought he should. Like you, he saw it as a duty. We argued about it a lot. Sometimes I think if I just shut up, maybe it doesn't matter.
What happened to him? Oh, shit, you don't have to tell me.
I don't mind now. I did at first. At first, I couldn't talk to anybody. I just shut down. Grief, yes, of course, but I was so angry. I think I held on to that because anger was all I had that kept me connected to him. And I drank to numb everything else. I had a dream about him once. Woke up and he was sitting beside me on the bed. No big message from the beyond. He just sat there and looked at me. And he held my hand. And I woke up. Eventually it became clear to me that the anger and the alcohol were holding me back, and I started to let go of both of them. And then I could talk about it. I think it's good to talk about what weighs on your heart. It was for me anyway. It didn't change the facts any, but I felt better. Eventually, 3 weeks into his tour, his Humvee hit an IED. I was told he died instantly. It was a closed casket service.
I really wanted to be a Marine, but there was just no way. Flat feet.
Trump got out of service in Vietnam claiming he had bone spurs.
I wasn't trying to get out of service. I wanted in. Now, there's a difference.
Right. Sorry.
And what difference does it make? Bush ducked service in Vietnam, and so did Clinton.
Good point. You don't have a problem with people like them touting patriotism while avoiding service?
Hey, all politicians lie. It's part of the game.
So how do we judge which politician is good and who isn't?
By what they do.
So we should judge people not by their rhetoric and not by their intentions, but by their actions? Is there a lot of that?
Define a lot.
So you went Army. Did you have a choice in area of service?
In theory. I mean, I told them I wanted to serve in a combat unit.
But that didn't work out.
They made promises, sure, but no, it didn't. I mean, I was in a combat zone, so I guess technically I was.
And how did you wind up in military police?
It was so stupid. They ask you for your work experience, right? And the last job I had was part-time watchman for H-E-B food store.
You said you worked security.
I didn't lie exactly. I just described it as maybe a little more than it was.
But what did you think of being an MP?
After I got over being pissed about it, I kind of liked it.
Why?
I liked the order, the organization of the Army a lot. Even when it was messed up, it had a structure, clean lines of authority. I liked being part of what maintained that structure. I liked bringing order.
You were very good at it too. A lot of positive comments in your packet.
Yeah, that surprise you?
Just offering an observation.
Okay. I mean, so that was part of it. I was good at something for once. It was really good. It wasn't that hard. I mean, if you did your job like you were supposed to do, when you were supposed to do it, you moved up. I liked that a lot. It was clear.
Multiple promotions during your 4 years of active duty, resulting in you being a sergeant when you left. Where did you serve?
Stateside, Fort Riley and Fort Hood, overseas, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Iraq.
What was that like?
I liked Fort Hood. I made a lot of good friends there. And one of them was killed in that shooting.
Nidal Hassan in 2009.
Yeah. My buddy John Reich, he served and stayed in the service. He toured all over the world, including a lot of really dangerous places. And then he comes back to the States, back to Fort Hood. He gets shot in the head walking into the PX. He left a wife and 2 young kids behind. That got me thinking about the whole illegal immigrant thing.
Well, Nidal wasn't an immigrant. He was born here.
Well, his parents were immigrants.
So how far back should we go in terms of immigration policy? To be safe. 1 generation? 2? Because at some point in the past, we were all immigrants, right? Except for Native Americans and those of us who didn't have a choice in the matter.
Well, what about those guys on 9/11?
They were all on visas.
The Boston guys were immigrants.
They came with their parents as kids, but none of them were illegal. In fact, our second most devastating terrorist attack, the Oklahoma bombing, was carried out by a U.S. citizen, born and raised and white and Christian.
A country has a right to protect its borders. If you don't have borders, then you don't have a country. What's so hard about understanding that?
Well, I wouldn't disagree that borders need protecting. The question, I guess, is from whom and how. What was your experience in the Middle East?
Hot, as in fry an egg on your forehead, and boring. I mean, you could never leave the base, going to town. Made people antsy. We had a lot of trouble with discipline, drinking, drugs, stupid shit.
I've seen your service report, but for the record, did you serve in Abu Ghraib?
No, contrary to what the fake news says out there, I did not.
And what were your feelings about that?
Whatever I say is just going to be misunderstood or used against me.
Maybe, but you're also in a unique position to comment. Few people have your experience.
Or would want it. Okay, yeah, you had a situation that got out of control, obviously. Why? Chaotic conditions resulted from a lack of infrastructure, absurd overcrowding, inadequate training, poor discipline, and confusion over mission goals.
You ascribe to the few bad apples theory?
I think that's a very convenient way for the brass to cover their ass. I mean, Rumsfeld certainly seems to be doing all right now, don't you think? Big book sale and all. And what was that top officer convicted in any of that? Lieutenant Colonel Jordan. And then 6 months later, he's cleared of all wrongdoing. They tossed a lot of little people into the trash and then congratulated themselves.
Karpinski was demoted.
Yeah, sure, dereliction of duty and shoplifting. Yeah, Jesus wept.
Defense contractor Agility Holdings paid over $5 million to former detainees.
Wow, that must have hurt. You know what they earned that year? $3.7 billion.
Well, you left the Army in 2005. Why?
I joined up because of 9/11, and after Saddam was captured, I felt like, mission accomplished.
Iraq, of course, had nothing to do with 9/11.
Well, we weren't going to invade Saudi Arabia, were we? Now, my term was up, and being overseas didn't have much appeal anymore.
And you'd met your wife by then, soon-to-be wife?
I don't want to talk about her. And we're not going to talk about my wife in here. Stacy, she had nothing to do with any of this.
Okay. So you went home and joined law enforcement. Why?
Well, Harvard Law School turned me down. It's what I knew. It's all I knew. So why not?
You worked in various state law enforcement agencies and then finally joined the private sector in 2008.
Geo.
Why then?
That's where the money was.
And you wound up working in Pecos, Texas at the Reeves County Detention Complex, which is the largest private prison in the world. Or it was.
Or, yeah, it was under contract with the Federal Bureau of Prisons and the Arizona Department of Corrections.
How many inmates?
4,000 criminal aliens, drug offenses or immigration violations, usually serving 1 to 5, and most get deported on release.
You enjoy your work?
It was okay.
What were your feelings about the facility?
We had 2 security situations in my first 14 months. After that, things calmed down.
You mean riots?
I wouldn't call it that. It wasn't that, serious.
Why was there a problem?
Usual stuff.
There were claims of substandard medical care.
Yeah.
Well, given what would later happen in El Paso, that kind of jumps out at you.
Apples and oranges.
So you wouldn't describe the medical care as substandard?
Prisons, they're not supposed to be comfortable. Taxpayers don't want criminals to be comfortable. They want them to be punished. So, in a for-profit facility has additional pressures to keep an eye on the bottom line. So, I would say medical care was definitely not lavish, but I wouldn't describe it as substandard.
In a 7-month period there, 5 men died, including an epileptic Mexican citizen, Jesus Manuel Galindo, who was denied medical treatment despite repeated pleas for help.
A Mexican citizen. Some people would say if Mr. Galindo hadn't been in the United States illegally, none of that would have happened.
Are you one of those people? Do you think Mr. Galindo deserved to die?
If you will note, a year after my arrival, medical services improved and there were no more riots. I'm very proud of that.
Are you suggesting one led to the other? Because I also see that during your management, security forces were substantially increased, as was the use of long-term isolation units. Mother Jones Magazine called it one of the 10 worst prisons in the United States.
Mother Jones Magazine. There's a, what do you call it, a very objective news source. Come on.
Well, bad enough that in August 2016, the Justice Department announced they'd be phasing out the use of all private prisons.
But they didn't, did they?
No, the election changed that. In February 2017, new Attorney General Sessions announced he was in support of private prisons. Stock prices rose immediately. Would you describe yourself as political at the time?
Not really, no.
Party affiliation?
Republican?
Why?
I don't know, my dad was. They're tougher on crime, I guess. I like lower taxes. The first president I voted for was Bush, the younger.
Was he a good president?
No worse than Obama. Two sides of the same coin as far as I'm concerned. A lot of talk, but neither of them really care about people like us.
What do you mean?
Working people, middle class. I mean, we used to be something, but now I had friends losing their houses, their jobs, and neither party seemed to care. My dad had some health problems, and it turns out his insurance didn't cover much of anything, and it just ate up his retirement. And within a year, suddenly he was working as a greeter at Walmart. 70-something years old, standing on his feet 8 hours a day, working for less than minimum. And meanwhile, all our jobs were going to Mexico and China and places like that, and then the illegals here taking what jobs are left, and shit, nobody gave a damn. For a long time, I wasn't paying attention, but I woke up pretty fast because it was clear the country was going into the toilet.
You a Trump supporter from the beginning?
I never claimed to be one of the originals.
Your record shows otherwise.
That's one of the things I wanted to explain. I had a friend, it was really a friend of a friend, who said at the time that I could get my name into the records as an original, and it wouldn't cost me all that much, and it would be helpful down the line, professionally, a good connection. So I said, sure. I never really thought about it much after that. But that was all after the election. Before the election, during the primaries, I didn't know what to make of him. I mean, I knew he was a gazillionaire and had his name all over everything. He was on that TV show where he fired people, but one night I was in this bar with some friends, and those early debates was on TV, and he was very entertaining, I mean, the way he would just put down those stuffed shirts and leave them standing there in just a little flop sweat pool of their own canned bullshit. It was funny. You could just see the gears in their machinery grind to a halt because they didn't know what to do with him. And then the nicknames, Little Rubio, Low Energy Bush, Lion Ted, he just zinged them. They were like a lot of little fish you pulled out of the water and threw up on the bank, and there they are, gasping for air, all goggle-eyed. It was damn funny. And it felt good to see these guys who just, like Jeb Bush, he just seemed to think he was owed the presidency because of his family and his name. And there he was, Trump making fun of him on TV, and Bush looking all pained like he said he had a bad case of hemorrhoids or something.
So you got into him?
I went to a rally. I don't really know why. I guess I just thought it would be fun, and I was kind of curious. So he did a rally in Dallas on my day off. And
so you've switched jobs now? You're working for a new private prison company, Magnum Security?
Yeah, Magnum.
Why?
They offered me a raise and more responsibility.
Overseeing their new facility outside of El Paso.
Yeah. So I went to the rally, and it was amazing. I felt comfortable there.
Comfortable?
Yeah, I looked around and I saw a lot of people who looked like me. Just ordinary people with families.
White people?
Yeah, I guess, sure. Mostly, yeah.
Christian?
What's wrong with that?
Nothing.
No, the way you ask it seems like there is. And I wonder about that. And I got to wondering about that at that rally. I mean, if you can have gay pride and black pride and trans whatever pride, why can't I be proud to be white? Why can't I be proud to be Christian? I mean, who speaks up for us anymore? And it seemed like he did. He say these things kind of edgy, you know, and things you're not supposed to say. And he would say them, and you could just feel the crowd. You could feel the crowd kind of jump because a line had been crossed, or a line you'd been told all your life you couldn't cross. And now here it had been crossed in public, and lightning hadn't come down and struck this guy. In fact, he looked really happy. And then you could just feel the crowd relax, like this enormous weight had been taken off their shoulder. And then there would be this, this little electric thrill, like, I don't know, like when you were a kid and you did something you'd been told that was wrong, but you did it anyway. That little jolt. Then the crowd would get really lively. They would start shouting back at him, and that would work him up, back and forth. It was like being part of a wave or something, a landslide. It's big, bigger than yourself. You didn't feel little anymore. You didn't feel put down anymore, or shamed. You didn't feel shamed anymore.
Well, what about the violence at his rallies? People getting beaten up.
Hey, those guys were there to provoke people, and they succeeded. I mean, the whole thing was all kind of like a pro wrestling thing, a performance.
Some people got really hurt.
Nobody died.
No, that would be later.
Small things, help put up yard signs, hand out flyers, work the phones.
And then you started doing security.
I handled security for 2 events in Texas, that's all.
And that's where you met him?
Yes, ma'am.
What was that like?
Well, I was on stage before the rally, checking security, when he came out with his bodyguard to check the on-set lighting. He does that himself. He pays that kind of attention to detail, Think about it. So anyways, I just kept doing my thing, and his bodyguard came over and said, "Mr. Trump would like to meet you." And I walked over, and he nodded at me, asked me my name, and told me I was doing a good job.
That was it?
That was pretty cool. I mean, I wasn't anybody special, but he saw me, He took the time to say hello. That's a big deal.
Okay, so I have to ask, the hands, are they really small?
They kind of are.
Did he shake your hand?
Are you kidding? He doesn't do that. There's too many germs. That's how he stays so healthy. He didn't get pneumonia and faint.
Like Hillary?
Yeah.
What turned you off about her?
What doesn't? She's a liar. Benghazi, the email thing, the foundation.
Oh, come on. Most of that was blown completely out of proportion. And there's no comparison with him. Every time he opened his mouth, he lied.
I don't agree. I don't see it that way. I mean, okay, yeah, he lied. But all politicians lie, right? I get that. So part of that was him doing what he had to do. But, he was also telling a lot of hard truth, too. He was knocking both parties, not just Democrats, for their bullshit about NAFTA and Iraq and NATO.
And immigrants.
Yeah, sure, that was a big part of it.
So, what's your take on that?
I'm not... Look, nobody believes this, of course, and I get that. I understand that after everything. But I'm not prejudiced like people think. I don't care who you are or where you're from, but people just shouldn't be able to come into this country illegally and take away our jobs and services and resources. I mean, that just seems pretty clear to me. And of course, I'm not alone in this. He won the election.
You think when people voted for him, they were voting for martial law?
People were voting to get their country back. And then after the Times Square thing, people were pissed. It was 9/11 all over again.
A lot of people now wonder if the Times Square event wasn't some kind of false flag operation.
A fake attack? People died. 2 square blocks irradiated.
Well, not that the attack didn't happen. Of course it did. What is being questioned is the narrative. Who set it off and why? The Russian investigation was heating up then, and the attack certainly took focus off that.
Come on. I mean, why is it when conservatives wonder about bullshit like this, conspiracies, we're being paranoid, but when liberals do, they're being smart? Maybe it's not all that complicated. A Muslim terrorist tried to blow up 2 bombs in New York when Obama was president, and we were just lucky the second bomb didn't go off.
Because 2 other Muslim men disarmed the second bomb.
By accident. Dumpster diving heroes. The point is, this time we didn't get lucky. We got hit. And that people finally started to get what he'd been talking about the illegals and how dangerous they are.
The men arrested for the bombing didn't enter the country illegally, they were born here.
They were Muslim. And the truck they used was owned by an illegal immigrant from Mexico.
Mr. Ortiz is Catholic. So the conspiracy here is between Muslims and Catholics? How does that work?
He claims he's Catholic. How do we know?
And Mr. Ortiz said his truck was stolen.
Why didn't he report it then?
Probably because he didn't have papers and figured the loss of the truck was better than being deported or worse.
This is what I don't get about you people. Like it or not, we're in a war. Like it or not, ISIS has declared war on us. Radical Islam has declared war on us. Your brother understood that, but you tie yourself in knots trying to explain things away when usually the simplest explanation is the truth.
Well, there's a simple explanation for what you did, Rick, but you reject that. Or your lawyer did at your trial. He claimed all kinds of mitigating circumstances in your defense.
You can argue all you want about Times Square, but the point is, it happened and people turned to the president to take charge.
So he declares martial law and starts rounding people up.
Protects Americans, real Americans, and starts fulfilling his campaign promise to deport illegals. Not exactly a surprise since he's been talking about it since the beginning. And come on, we've been rounding people up forever. Eisenhower was doing it in the 50s in Operation Wetback. Even your precious Obama, he kicked out way more illegals than Bush ever did.
In his first term, yes. But in his second term,
it was happening.
that was cut in half.
Been happening. It's American as apple pie. All countries have a right to protect themselves.
Within the rule of law.
Martial law is law.
It doesn't permit any and everything. And if it did, you wouldn't be here, would you?
I'm here because that's what always happens. Shit rolls downhill and the little guy takes the fall, while the people who really set things in motion, they always walk. Always.
Trump isn't walking.
Oh, impeached. Exiled to Palm Beach. Wow, that must sting.
So let's talk about how you did wind up here. He wins, doesn't waste any time, and on January 27th issues his first executive order curtailing immigration. Chaos results.
They kind of screwed the pooch on that one.
9 days later, the courts blocked the administration. They regroup. On February 22nd, Homeland Security issues 2 memos, and now immigration officials or local police can arrest anybody they think could be a risk to public safety or national security. Then the Times Square event happens. The president declares martial law, restricts the press, suspends civil liberties, and the roundup begins. Millions of people.
The whole thing was a clusterfuck of massive proportions.
I thought you were a fan of the roundup.
Not the way they did it. So you're arresting all these people, and some of them have just arrived, and some of them have been in the country for years, decades maybe. And some of them, are clearly illegal, and some weren't illegal before, but now they are illegal. And however you want to slice it, suddenly there are a hell of a lot of people. And then the program to deport hits a snag.
Mexico and 23 other countries refuse to accept.
Refuse to accept their own citizens. That's kind of fucked up.
Well, why should they? Some of them, like Mexico, saw it as refusing to participate in what they considered a racist and immoral system.
Or maybe they just didn't want those people either.
Bad hombres?
Whatever the reason, people are stacking up. Normal facilities are overwhelmed. So the government turns to the private sector because we can move faster.
Like you at Magnum's new facility, miles outside of El Paso near an industrial park? Why did you build there?
Security reasons.
Or avoidance of burdensome local regulations?
All corporations build where costs are cheapest. Why should private prisons be any different?
What was the facility like?
Here's the thing, it was really good at first. They built new and converted some existing buildings into a pretty solid complex. We had 3 housing facilities, a medical clinic, a kitchen.
Did you advise them at all? With your practical experience and your architectural interests, that would make sense.
When they asked my opinion, I gave it. That's it. How to make things flow better, security.
What was security like?
Standard. Double barbed wire fence, 8 feet apart with armed guards.
That's standard.
Pretty much.
So you're there. What happened next?
Pretty much like they always had. We would get groups of deportees, usually in buses or vans,
Handcuffed?
and sometimes shackled. Hey, some of these people were felons, convicted of serious crimes, violent crimes.
Did you separate the felons from the other people, the undocumented aliens?
At first, yes. Later, that became impossible. I didn't like it. I raised a stink about it, but I never got any help. So we would process the paperwork and get them squared away.
And what did that entail, squaring away?
All personal possessions are removed and cataloged. Everybody's issued an orange jumpsuit, like this fetching number. And you get issued a bed, and the number of that bed then becomes your ID.
No names.
It's easier that way. I mean, you get a lot of Joneses or Juans or Mohammeds or whatever. I mean, it's way too confusing.
What then? What did these people do?
Wait.
That's it.
You're not allowed to work. There are head counts 4 times a day, and you're always required to be standing by your bed when a count is going on. You're allowed visitors on a very limited basis, just your lawyer, no family. Very few phones, so if you want to use the phone, you have to put your name on a list and wait. And of course, you got to pay to use the phone.
No books, no TV?
Well, there are TVs in the communal areas, and books, some. Bibles were permitted.
The Quran?
Sure. See, we weren't a prison, really. I mean, well, we were and we weren't. What I mean is people, they weren't expected to stay there, so there was no rehabilitation thing going on. We were just supposed to hold them and then process them out.
Process out.
Repatriate.
Bus? Plane?
All of the above.
Do families stay together?
I'm a big believer in that. It calms people down, reduces a lot of anxiety.
Efficient?
I just think it's the right thing to do. So anyway, that's the way it was, but it became harder and harder when the numbers started ramping up.
What are we talking about?
I mean, normal times, you got maybe 20 to 40 people a day and processed out about the same. But suddenly, we're getting 200 to 400 people a day. And at the same time, countries are refusing repatriation. So you got this terrible overflow with all these people in limbo.
Sounds crazy.
It was fucking nuts. I mean, we doubled up and tripled everywhere we could, but pretty quickly that wasn't going to work. Security was a nightmare. So we kind of borrowed a page from Sheriff Arpaio and put up tent facilities in the exercise yard for the single men, but I didn't like that.
Why?
From a security standpoint, it's not ideal, and conditions are extremely uncomfortable.
Comfort was a concern of yours?
You know, I'm not some freaking sadist, all right? I was doing the absolute best I could for everybody, working around the clock, pulling every string I had.
I'm just trying to understand, Rick, given what happened.
I'm just a guy, all right? I'm a regular guy in ordinary, in very extraordinary circumstances, trying to do the best he can with very limited resources.
You were in charge of the facility.
I'm one in a long chain of responsibility with a lot of people to answer to. To the extent I could, I did the best I could to mitigate things. And when things turned serious, it wasn't like I jumped at the opportunity. Oh boy, this is going to be fun. It was never like that, never.
Why didn't you quit?
Because it was my shop and my people. And some of these guys I'd worked with for years, and they'd followed me there. What, I was just going to, abandon them? No way. I mean, maybe it's old-fashioned, but loyalty counts for something in my book. It's a two-way street. And who would replace me? I mean, it probably would have been a lot worse.
Worse than what happened? Was it your idea to use the football stadium?
Yes.
Why?
I was trying to fix the overcrowding, and it had obvious advantages.
Such as?
It was nearby, had a lot of bathrooms, facilities to cook and distribute food, some shelter from the elements, and quantifiable egress and entrance gates, so it was easier from a security standpoint.
How did the detainees react to the stadium?
I think initially it was seen as an improvement, especially if you were in the tent city.
But some people, it made them anxious, right? Why did it make them anxious, Rick?
I didn't know this at the time, all right? I'm no historian, but in some countries, apparently some South American countries, stadiums have been used as detention centers by governments, and a A lot of bad things happened there.
Argentina, Chile, Mexico.
I honestly think we would have been fine, except for the sanitation problem.
Sanitation problem.
That many people all crowded together, the issue was always sanitation, disposal of human waste. I mean, initially the stadium was working okay, but the people just kept coming. And I'd done everything I could, bringing in as many honey wagons as I could find. But it was getting harder and harder to keep them maintained properly. And the corporation was just not responding on this issue, and I was always being told to make do. I brought in industrialized-sized containers of hand sanitizer, and I trucked in water for drinking and cleaning. But you're just rolling the dice in a situation like that, and eventually it caught up with us. I mean, it was August, it was hot as hell, so we were already experiencing dehydration in kids, the elderly, the immune-compromised individuals.
And these people were in the general population. You hadn't been able to maintain separate populations, right?
No, it just got crazy. There was more and more people arriving every day. And I would be on the phone asking for help, telling them we were full up. And the answer was always the same.
What?
Figure it out.
So August, middle of a heat wave, and people start getting sick.
Cholera. First case was August 22nd. You ever have any experience with that? It's devastating. Violent diarrhea, vomiting, muscle cramps. As soon as we figured out what we were dealing with, we did the usual things. Rehydration combined with antibiotics. But the thing with cholera is it's just so fucking fast. We had the first fatalities within 2 hours. It's just terrifying. And all our initial stocks of oral rehydration were gone in half a day, and forget IV use. I mean, we were making our own makeshift compound out of table salt and sugar, but we didn't have any potassium supplements, and pretty soon we were having to triage the situation.
Triage the situation.
Decide who got medicine and who didn't.
And if they didn't?
Then the odds were not great for them.
They were more likely to die.
Yes.
How did you decide?
It wasn't just me deciding. I wasn't the decider-in-chief. Actually, it wasn't me at all, going bedside to bedside or whatever.
Medical staff?
We were understaffed, as I said. So yeah, medical staff at first, and then you had guards, prison guards with no training for this kind of situation, having to make choices.
There are stories of guards selling rehydration meds to the highest bidder.
I only heard of one case like that, and I fired his ass immediately.
So it happened?
Well, not like some people suggest, but yes, of course it happened. It's human nature. People were desperate. Their family members were dying. Their spouses, their kids were dying. And if you got medicine, then you probably lived. So you did what you had to do. I mean, wouldn't you? And there's always some asshole who will take advantage of that.
And what did they trade with? I thought when people came into detention, they lost all their private goods.
Initially, yes, but when we got overwhelmed, my people got sloppy. So there was anything you could smuggle in. Money, jewelry, drugs, all the usual stuff in prisons.
And if you didn't have any of these things?
I suppose you bartered, you traded.
With what? Sex?
Yes, probably some did.
So people were offering sex to save family members?
Later I heard that.
You didn't know that at the time?
I had an infectious outbreak on my hands. I wasn't paying close attention to who was fucking who.
What was the attitude of the staff to all of this?
My people tried to be professional about it, but like I said, we were overwhelmed and some people were freaked out. And these are guards, not nurses. And cholera is, the smell alone is, it was hard to hold on to your compassion. And a lot of people were scared and angry, I guess.
Angry?
Yeah, the whole thing about illegals being rapists and murderers, and being unclean and bringing disease into the country. And here they were, so sick and all, and some of my guys felt like they brought this on themselves. And you got to remember, my people were exhausted. They were pulling double and triple shifts, and the situation was just chaotic. Every problem seemed to lead to another problem. So you could never get a moment to catch your breath and just think things through.
What other problems?
Bodies. Suddenly we had these bodies piling up, and our mortuary just wasn't equipped to handle the volume, and the heat made the situation even worse. I called corporate, and they were supposed to get me some portable mortuaries like FEMA used in Katrina, but they were so slow in coming. And they just told me to call the city and the county, and I did that. And I even called the state. But nobody wanted any part of this, you know. Everybody just kicked the can down the road. You deal with it.
So people knew what was going on?
People always knew. Look, the location was somewhat remote, but we had guys coming and going all the time making deliveries. And the staff goes home at night and people talk, you know. They talk to their spouses, their neighbors. This idea that we were out there doing terrible things and nobody knew is bullshit. At the trial, you never saw so many goddamn virgins all of a sudden.
When you went home at night, did you talk to Stacy?
No.
Why?
I wanted to keep her out of it, all right? It just felt like the one place in my life that wasn't... If I could keep that separate, I could just... Eventually, I went home less and less. It was just easier. I had a cot put up in my office and slept there when I slept.
So you had a problem with bodies?
While I was waiting for somebody to throw me a rope, I tried to make some kind of makeshift mortuary in one of the locker rooms using block ice and thermal blankets. But I was worried we were going to lose control of the whole situation from a health standpoint.
And at this point, you had your first visit from corporate, Richards?
Yes, ma'am. Vice President of Operations named Jack Richards.
Your lawyer talked about him a lot at your trial, but nothing could be substantiated because Richards was dead by then.
He hung himself awaiting trial, they say.
You don't believe that?
With a trash bag?
Interesting you don't believe that. That's what they said about Sandra Bland, that she hung herself with a trash bag. A lot of black people don't believe that either.
I don't know anything about that.
So you're inclined to believe a conspiracy in the former, but not the latter.
Kind of off topic, aren't we?
So you finally had the attention of corporate headquarters and Jack Richards shows up. What was that like?
At first, I was just grateful, you know, because I had a real crisis on my hands. But Richards didn't seem to care about any of that, except how it might look, the publicity angle and shit. And they were making money hand over fist at this point. Plus, there looked like there were a lot more Fed contracts would be let, and we were likely to get a big share of those too. So mostly Richard just wanted the problem to go away.
Go away?
He took me to dinner at TGI Fridays and talked about it in very clinical terms. A sanitation problem, troublesome, potentially embarrassing disposal issues. You know, emergency situation requiring out-of-the-box thinking.
So what happened?
We started
burning the bodies.
Yeah.
Where?
Look, nobody knew what to do. It's not something you get trained for. So we did an experiment first. There was a landfill garage dump 5 miles away, and we first started trucking bodies there, but even with an accelerant like diesel fuel, it's a lot harder than you might think.
Who was participating in these experiments? These were guards?
Guards at first, and then some detainees.
Detainees?
We were short-staffed, so we recruited people.
Recruited how?
With privileges, medicine, extra food.
They didn't protest?
I imagine they were pretty intimidated.
So the landfill option didn't work out very well?
It was inefficient, like I said, but also we were getting complaints about the smoke and the smell. I mean, it was insane. Everybody had a problem with what we were doing, but nobody was offering any solutions. It was always on me. I hated the whole thing.
You had no license, of course.
No.
This was a clear violation of Texas Law 4208.
A misdemeanor, yes.
Texas Penal Code 3709 is a felony offense.
That's destroying evidence of a crime. There was no actual crime here.
That will come later. Comfortable with this?
Hell no, I was very fucking uncomfortable with it. I threatened to quit several times.
But you never did.
Richards had me over a barrel. This whole clusterfuck had happened on my watch. I was responsible. And he made it clear that he would hang me out to dry if I made a fuss.
But how bad could that be, Rick? I'm struggling to understand. As you yourself said, the situation was in some ways out of your control. They had stuffed the facility despite your complaints. They hadn't provided you with the necessary medical staff or equipment you had demanded. Why didn't you quit and fight them in court if you had to?
Historians, you guys always have the answer after the fact. You know, why did Napoleon turn left instead of right? If he had turned right, he would have won. Well, probably because he was in the middle of a fucking battle, crapping his pants with shells going off all around him and people dying horribly. You forget what it was like. This country was fucking crazy. You were either with the government and the American people or against the government and the American people. And if you were against them, then maybe you ought to get over there with those illegals. And Stacy was expecting and the pregnancy was not going so well, and my being away was hard enough as it was. I just didn't want to take the chance. I got them to promise to send me more medical supplies and to consider me for a transfer anywhere. It didn't matter. I would take anywhere. I just wanted to take my family and leave where I was as soon as possible.
That must have been incredibly hard for you with Stacy like that.
We were both really scared. The doctors were not optimistic.
And then Richards left and you still had your problem.
At that point, it was getting worse, in fact.
That's where the factory came in.
There was a blast furnace in this abandoned industrial complex nearby that was going to be decommissioned.
And you started burning the bodies there.
Yes.
You kept records of all this? Each person, coroner's statement, causes of death, etc.?
Initially, yes. Later, no.
Why not later?
We were no longer pretending to follow the normal rules. I mean, Richard said that under the circumstances, we could just let it slide.
Record keeping, specifically mortality records.
Yes.
And you say Richard sanctioned
It was his idea.
Richards?
Yes, ma'am.
The prosecution made a lot of the fact that there was no correspondence, hard correspondence between you and Richards. No letters, no memos, no emails. Not from his end anyway. And not one on any of these key decisions like this.
There were always conversations, either by phone or in person. It was the only way I could get his attention.
Didn't you think that was unusual?
At first, I didn't care. I was just glad to have somebody's attention, some help. Later on, yeah, I thought it was odd. The mortality record thing, I just put down to ordinary productivity incentives.
Productivity incentives.
We were being paid by the body.
Person.
So... Right, person. Government was paying us per person to hold and then process illegals.
Process meaning repatriate.
Yes. So keeping the bodies on the books a little longer meant, more money. And I knew that was wrong, I know. But, my administrative assistant, Janice, and I, we talked it over, and we thought that money might free up additional resources and actually might make things better for everybody. I get that that's not exactly straight, but my intentions were good.
Later process would mean something else.
Yes.
How did you get to that?
It was during another visit with Richards. We were having some serious security issues.
There were riots.
There were some demonstrations, and in one case, they injured 2 guards and an inmate was killed.
Why were they demonstrating?
Conditions were terrible. People were still sick. I mean, it was a nightmare.
So Richards came down again. What happened?
He was pissed. Not even a pretense of being concerned about me or anything. And he didn't come by himself this time. There were 3 guys with him, 2 of them claiming to be from Homeland Security, and this 3rd guy, Jameson, said he was a representative of the NSA.
The NSA?
I said that's what they claimed.
What makes you think they weren't who they said they were?
I don't know, just a feeling. Maybe they were. The whole thing was just, unsettling. And they seemed like very wired-in guys. Dressed smart, talked tough, knew this person and that person. What was I going to do, card them? Clearly they impressed the hell out of Richards because he was very, very careful around them, very respectful. Like, always checking their responses to what he said or didn't say.
What did they say?
They said that we were in a situation in this country that had reached a crisis. We were in a war and we were losing. We had to be bold. Seize the moment. Show them we weren't going to be pushed around anymore. I mean, the pitch was military, very patriotic.
When did you understand what they were saying?
The NSA guy, Jameson, said to me, "You need to make them go away." And I said, "The detainees?" And he nodded. And then I laughed. I made a joke of it. I said, "Like what, kill them all?" I mean, I couldn't believe we were being serious here. But he didn't laugh. Nobody laughed. Richards just looked away, his face all bloodless all of a sudden.
What did they say?
Nothing. They all just looked at me.
What did you say?
I said I couldn't do that. And then Jameson, the NSA guy, he took me by the arm, pulled me away from the others, and he started talking to me. And very quietly. He was a big guy, he was tall, forceful, but quiet. I had this feeling about him, like, he was military once, just something about the way he held himself. He said, "Look, who do you think you are? You can't do this? You've already done this. People are dead under your watch. You've already broken half a dozen laws at least." And I said, "Not like this." And he looked at me and he said, "Let me tell you something. I got a son. He's 11 now. When he was 5, he had a brain tumor. Brain tumor, all right? Size of a tennis ball. That motherfucker was going to kill him. So the doctor said, this is what we've got to do. We are going to crack open his skull and cut out the tumor. Scoop it out like a rotten melon." That scared the hell out of me. But I said, okay, because I wanted my son to live. So they did that, but it didn't work. It came back. So then they zapped my son, my child, with huge doses of radiation. And that didn't work. The cancer came back. So finally, they dripped chemicals into his body. And these chemicals were so toxic that the nurses who did the procedures, they had to wear special clothing and wear special masks just to handle it. Because it would burn their skin if they touched it. They were going to drip that shit into my boy's veins. And that's what they did. And he screamed until he lost his voice. Then he just wept. He asked me why I let them hurt him like that. He was a good boy. Wouldn't be done wrong. And all I could do was just hold him and pray a lot. That's what I did. And he lived. He's cancer-free now. Aside from the scars on the top of his head, which you can't really see, he's a normal kid. He loves baseball and is crazy about Pokemon, and he's okay. And then Jameson put his arm around me and he said, "This is the same thing, Rick. We've got the same problem here. This country has a kind of a rotten inside, and if we don't deal with it, it's going to kill us. So we got to take it out. It's not going to be pretty, but it's necessary." And then this car pulled up, government car, black sedan, and we got into it, and we drove out to the factory.
Your factory.
There were guys out there, a construction team. I didn't know any of them, hadn't seen them before. Jameson must have brought them in from somewhere else. They were just regular guys, but they seemed to know what they were doing.
What were they doing?
They were retrofitting one of the large storage rooms. Originally, it was a low-ceiling brick room with concrete floor and windows. They had replaced the wooden entrance doors with 2 large double steel doors. And there was a thick glass peephole into one of the doors. On the other side of the room, you had a very thick roll-up steel door, outside of which was a loading dock 100 yards from the furnace area.
What else?
They had enlarged the drains in the floor.
What else?
They added a large exhaust fan in the ceiling and bricked in the window on 3 sides, and on the 4th side they added steel ducts.
Why?
Jameson explained to me that all you had to do was back a semi up and connect the exhaust pipe to the plumbing with flexible hoses. Very easy, he said.
Oh.
They also added 2 large water mains just outside the doors,
Water mains? Why?
so you could sluice the floors. We ran a test that afternoon. A bus, windows blacked out, transported a group out from the stadium. They were told they were going to be finally be deported. And they were relieved. You could see it on their faces. And the bus pulls up, and they were unloaded into the room and told to wait in line. They had painted lines on the floor, like at the airport when you fly in from another country. But they lined up. Everybody was very obedient. The doors were closed. Semi started up. The whole thing took 20 minutes. Felt like forever. I went back to my office and threw up. I was shaking.
What did your men call these transport buses later on? There was some kind of joke about that, right?
I heard some people call them taco trucks.
Why didn't you stand up to them?
He never said it in so many words, Jameson, but he made it very clear that if I didn't approve, I thought about it, I really did. But there was Stacy and the baby, and our baby had just been born a couple of weeks premature, and she was having some difficulties. They weren't sure how serious. My family needed me. I had responsibilities.
You had responsibilities.
I wasn't going to abandon my family. And even if I had made some kind of stand or something, so what? Somebody else just would have taken my place.
How did your staff take this?
Not everybody knew what was going on. We tried to keep it very compartmentalized. But nobody who knew was happy. Nobody. And there were bonuses attached, which were substantial. But still, some of my guys were upset, you know? We talked about it. The company had a mental health counselor come out, but people weren't sure if he was real or not, so most of them didn't talk to him.
Real?
There was some idea he might be an informant, and we were all pretty paranoid by this point. And once they sent out a minister. This was after my administrative assistant, Janice, had a nervous breakdown, I guess.
What did the minister say?
He gave a sermon about Joshua killing the Canaanites, and he quoted Psalm 106.
Remind me.
They did not destroy the people as the Lord commanded, but they mixed with the nations and learned to do as they did. Then the anger of the Lord was kindled against his people, and he abhorred his heritage. I noticed he didn't stay around to watch the process.
How did you handle it?
After that first time, I never went back to that factory when they were operating. If there was a problem, I might go out there, but mostly I stayed at the facility pushing papers. I drank heavily. I was also taking sedatives, Valium, Halcyon. It was the only way I could sleep.
Tell me about Esteban Gonzalez, the young boy. You seemed very upset by his testimony at the trial.
Oh, I liked that kid. I liked Esteban. And I kept him safe. And then he said all that stuff about me.
How did you even notice him?
He was very personable. He was funny and smart. And when he first arrived at the facility, he stood out. Made it clear he had skills.
Wood carving.
Yeah. For a 15-year-old, he was really good.
What would he do?
He would make things to order for the guards and staff, the little stuff. Crucifixes, letter openers, eagle pins were very popular, the flag, medallions with Make America Great Again. He made one for me and Stacy with our initials on it.
And you helped him out?
I made sure he had food. I made sure he had medicine when he got sick. I kept him safe from the other prisoners.
What happened to his parents?
I don't know.
Were they killed?
Probably.
He said he asked you many times and you told him not to worry about them. And then somehow this 15-year-old kid, somehow he gets a hold of somebody's cell phone.
One of the guards, some dumbass not thinking.
And Esteban, this kid, who has found himself in the seventh circle of hell, and somehow, amazingly, manages not just to survive, but has the presence of mind, the courage, to learn what he can, wait for his moment, and finally take a stand. He takes a picture, sends it out, and it goes viral. Suddenly, everybody's asking questions, and they come and they shut the factory down and arrest you. Landslide.
Yes.
We probably only have a few minutes or so. I wanted to ask you something. It didn't really come up so much at the trial. The plane.
The plane?
Tell me about the plane. You just said that after that first day, you never went back to the factory except when there was a problem. The implication was that the factory just ran on its own after that without you. But after a couple of weeks, somebody went to a lot of trouble to move an old, non-functioning airliner outside the factory to make it look more like an actual detention center. Like if you was to go to the processing, there was the plane on the other side of the building that was going to take you home. Pretty effective tactic. Like wood and soap. Did you do that? Nobody could have put that plane there, Rick, without your knowledge or your permission. I spoke to Esteban. He told me it was your idea. He said he heard you talking about it.
You talked to Esteban?
You were proud of it, he said. He said you even made a little joke. He said you called it Air America. Why did you do that, Rick? Put that plane there. Are you going to tell me it was a humanitarian gesture? How did you put it earlier? Because it was the right thing to do? Or was it to make the operation even more efficient? At the trial, there was disagreement about the exact number of people murdered at your factory. What do you think?
I don't know. I heard 25, 26, or 27.
1,000. When you finally went home to Stacey and told her what you were charged with, what did she say? What did she say when she understood?
She cried. She wouldn't look at me for a long time. She still doesn't really look at me.
Why did this happen, Rick? Help me. Help us understand.
Oh, I had this dream in here, nightmare, I guess. Woke me straight up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, shaking like detox. Nightmare is not the right word. Revelation. The president said he was going to build a wall, a beautiful wall, and he would make Mexico pay for it. And everybody laughed at that. All you smart people laughed at that because, of course, it's stupid. You can't really build a wall that high and that big to keep people out if they really want to get in. And Mexico is never going to pay for any of that shit. But that's not what he meant. See, that was the revelation. It wasn't a real wall, brick and mortar wall. That wasn't what he was talking about. What is a wall? It's a barrier, a device for keeping people out. What we built was so much more effective. It would keep people out for years because who would want to come here now?
have a talk back, and if you need to leave now or at any point during the talk back, please feel free to get up and go. And we also have the director here, Peter Alzano. Thank you for coming.
Any questions? Any answers? Yes, sir.
Is this based on some real cases, or is that a story that's not necessarily?
It's true to a point, but there wasn't the explosion in New York, the radiation in New York, and there wasn't a factory that killed people. However, if you've stayed up with the newspapers, the detention facilities, what they call them on our southern border, are way overcrowded, and they've neglected the humanitarian efforts that America has been known for. And they actually had a lawyer, and you can see this on YouTube. They had an administration lawyer arguing that children did not need toothpaste or soap or nutritional food, and neither did the other detainees. They've separated now over 5,000 children from their loved ones. So that they haven't, gone to the extremes that Rick did, but it's certainly not what you think of as
It's in the
America.
ballpark.
Pardon me?
It's in the ballpark.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah. Yes.
This play was for sale in the Tudorville gift shop last fall, so I'm curious what's happened since it was written, whether things have been added to it, or if the play had an audience other than here.
Yeah, I think it's had a few productions.
It's had a lot of productions.
Pardon me?
It's had a lot of productions.
It's had
It
a
was
lot.
licensed multiple places at the same time professionally in its initial launch to get it done as often as possible.
Yeah,
So they
I've only I read
did
one
a ton.
review about it, and it was done as a production. When I read the script, I thought it would serve the play better as a reading. And I was fortunate enough to have two remarkable people. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Just a comment, that must have been really hard to act.
Exhausted by the end, it's easy to feel that exhaustion. Yeah.
We worked very hard. It wasn't, we worked for about 4 weeks. We didn't work every day, but we worked a number of times a week. And they really cut the mustard on it. They worked very hard on it. But when you're acting on a piece of material, you certainly, of course, get involved in it, but you're also dealing with how best to express this script and the values in the script for an audience.
How's it changed the two of you?
That's interesting. That was a question that was asked last night.
What was the question?
How has it changed the actors?
Sometimes it takes a while after a production to realize the effect that a certain production has on me. So right now, I don't I can't really answer that question. Someone asked last night about perspective, if it's changed my perspective or anything like that. And, it's kind of preaching to the choir for me, so, yeah, so there's been no change in terms of my perspective or anything like that. bad. It was hard, it is hard to do.
Yeah.
It's very hard to do, it's not enjoyable. I enjoy acting. To be, honest, I enjoy the process. This story.
It's not enjoyable to
No,
watch.
it's not.
Yeah, the writing was so good. Just it's kind of far-fetched when I read it, and then I read it was a terrorist attack, which makes people freak out that anything's possible when a terrorist attack happens. That people would just they're capable of anything. And Peter said, just read this as a normal guy. It's more effective without going the full rednecky thing. Just it'll be more effective that way. And
And I think that's what the playwright intended. This is just a guy. He's just a normal, red-blooded American guy in a situation. And Gloria asked a number of times, like, why didn't you quit? Why didn't you quit? Why didn't you quit? And that's the reason she drove 9 hours. She wants an answer to that question, why? Why does these things happen? And she doesn't get an answer.
Reminds me of Hitler with a cog in the wheel. I mean, isn't that it?
Do you know that the concentration camps, and this is an interesting little sidelight, the concentration camps started 9 years before the death camps started. The concentration camps and the ghettos were originally meant as holding cells where they were going to take the Jews and put them in Madagascar because they thought the war would end, they'd have the French colonies, and that's where the Jews were going to go. When the food shortages started, they thought it would be more humane to shoot the people in the ghettos and the concentration camps. And what happened was the psychological impact on the soldiers shooting women and children and men was so extreme that they came up with the gas chambers. That initially it was exhaust, just exactly what Rick did. But that was the progression of, and interestingly enough, Stalin's war crimes, the war criminals in Russia, did say we were following orders. The war crimes of Japan said they were following orders. However,